Imagine the Olympics. Same athletes, same stadiums, same world watching. Except there are no doping rules. You're allowed EPO, you're allowed steroids, you're allowed growth hormone, you're allowed blood transfusion, polyurethane suits. Whatever you can get your hands on. The only rule is you show up and perform. So what happens? If you ask most people, they'd say the records will fall, all of them. In one weekend, you'd probably see 100-meter sprint so fast, it breaks the physics of what people would thought a human body could do. You'd see swimmers basically flying through water. That's what everybody assumed. That's what the enhanced games assumed when they actually ran this experiment legally, officially in Las Vegas on May 24th, 2026. And I want to talk about what actually happened because the result was not what anybody expected. And the reason why it turned out the way it did tells you something about the human body and honestly about performance in general. So let's get into it. First, you need to understand what these athletes were actually taking. Because if you haven't studied the stuff, it's easy to go, oh, steroids, that's bad, without actually understanding the mechanism. The mechanism is genuinely fascinating, and these are the three main categories of enhancements that were in play here. The first is anabolic androgenic steroids, AAS. The most common one you've probably heard of is something like nandrolone. So what does it do? It enters your cells, binds to the androgen receptors, and then the complex goes directly into the nucleus of the cell. It alters how your DNA is being read. It upregulates the production of actin and myosin, the two proteins that literally are your muscle. More than that, it triggers something called the myonuclear addition. Your muscle fibers recruit additional satellite cells which donate nuclei to the existing fibers. More nuclei means more protein synthesis machinery. The muscle doesn't just get bigger, it gets more capable of getting bigger. The ceiling itself rises. The result in practice, levels of hypertrophy and force output that a body could never produce naturally on any training program in any lifetime. The second category is EPO, erythropoietin and blood doping. This one targets a completely different system. EPO is a peptide hormone that signals your bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. More red blood cells means more hemoglobin. More hemoglobin means the blood carries more oxygen per unit volume. Why does that matter for performance? Because the moment you run out of aerobic capacity, the moment your body can't get enough oxygen to your muscles fast enough, you shift into anaerobic glycolysis. That's when lactate builds up. That's when your legs go dead and your lungs are on fire, and your pace falls off a cliff. EPO delays that moment. It pushes your aerobic ceiling dramatically upwards. In endurance sports especially, this is enormous. Your VO2 max, the maximum rate at which your body can consume oxygen, goes up in a way that years of training might never achieve. And blood doping works on the same principle. You bank your own blood during your training phase, then reinfuse it before a competition. Instant hematocrit spike, instant oxygen advantage. The third is human growth hormone, HGH. HGH is released by your pituitary gland and it signals your liver to produce IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. This acts synergistically with steroids. The steroids are building muscle. HGH is the thing that is frantically repairing the damage as fast as possible. Under normal physiology, after a brutal training session, your muscle tissue is torn at a micro level. Recovery takes days, sleep, nutrition, rest, the whole thing. HGH in a supraphysiological dose compresses the recovery window drastically. Tears that would take weeks to start healing start immediately, which means you can train harder more often without breaking down. Now here's the financial incentive that made this event even more interesting. The enhanced games weren't giving out medals. They put real money on world records. We are talking prize bonuses up to $1 million for breaking world records. So these athletes were not casually dabbling, they came prepared. Fully loaded, medically supervised, optimized. The hypothesis was simple. Remove the chemical ceiling and the record books get rewritten. One record fell. One. Out of the entire event, the 50-meter freestyle in swimming. And even that came with a massive asterisk. Because the swimmer was wearing a full polyurethane supersuit, which in itself is banned piece of technology. That effectively gives you buoyancy and compression advantage that has nothing to do with pharmacology. That was it. The men's 100-meter sprints, won by Fred Curley, a clean athlete, a fully WADA compliant competitor. The enhanced athletes who had been chemically preparing for this lost to a man who followed the rules. Women's 100 meters, same story. Clean athlete wins. The 50-meter backstroke in swimming, Hunter Armstrong. Clean. So you had athletes who were in the most literal sense chemically enhanced, legally with full medical supervision. Optimized for exactly this, and they still lost to athletes who were carrying none of that. The experiment ran, the hypothesis failed, and the more interesting question, why? Here's what the enhanced games fundamentally got wrong. They treated performance like a simple output. Like if you put more input in muscle, oxygen, more recovery, you get more output, linearly. That's not how the body works. The first thing you need to understand is neuromuscular disconnect. Sprinting is not just about how much force your legs can produce. It's about when that force fires, at what angle, in what sequence, coordinated across dozens of muscle groups in a fraction of a second. It's a timing problem as much as a power problem. Steroids increase peak contractile force. They do not improve myelination of your nervous system. They don't sharpen motor unit synchronization. You can't inject timing. What often happens instead is that the athlete gains raw strength that outpaces their neuromuscular control. The engine becomes more powerful than the chassis can manage, and when that happens, technique breaks down. Energy leaks out. What should be efficient, elastic movement becomes heavy and effortful. The second issue is the stretch shortening cycle. Elite sprinting relies heavily on what's called the SSC, the stretch shortening cycle. Your tendons act like loaded springs. When your foot hits the ground, the tendon stores elastic energy. When it releases, that energy propels you forward. It's essentially free speed. Elite sprinters have tendons that behave like carbon fiber. Steroids build muscle fast. Tendons don't adapt at the same rate. Tendons are slow to respond to loading. You end up with a situation where the muscle is pulling the super physiological force on a tendon that hasn't caught up yet. The spring is weaker than the engine that's driving it. The result isn't more explosive moment. It is a stiffer, heavier biomechanics. You lose elasticity that makes elite sprinting looks almost effortless. The third issue is proprioception, your body's spatial map of itself. Clean athletes have spent years calibrating their proprioceptive system to the exact power to weight ratio. Their center of mass, their ground contact time, the stride angle, all of this is baked through thousands of hours of repetition. The nervous system has a map. Chemically enhanced changes that map rapidly. The athlete's body composition shifts, force production changes, ground reaction force change, and the nervous system, which is calibrating in real time, is suddenly operating with outdated information. The spatial radar is off. Clean athletes who have done nothing unusual walk in with perfectly harmonized kinetic chain. Enhanced athletes walk in fighting their own physiology. I want to touch on the medical side of this because it matters for understanding the full picture. The enhanced games frames the WADA ban as a bodily autonomy issue, and I get that argument intellectually, but the medical reason these substances are banned is not puritanism. Exogenous steroids cause left ventricular hypertrophy. The main pumping chamber of the heart thickens unnaturally. This isn't healthy enlargement you see in endurance athletes. It stiffens the myocardium. It impairs how the heart fills between beats, and it dramatically raises the risk of fatal arrhythmia. EPO raises your hematocrit, the density of red blood cells in your blood. There is a threshold beyond which the blood becomes pathologically viscous. Under intense exercise, the cardiovascular system is working harder than it should against thicker blood. The risk of clots, strokes, heart attacks goes up significantly, and the HPTA axis, the hormonal feedback loop that governs testosterone production, shuts down under sustained exogenous hormone use. When you come off, the body has forgotten how to produce its own hormones. That's not a short-term problem, that's a long-term endocrine collapse. This isn't a fringe opinion, this is a consensus physiology. So here's my take on this. I don't think the enhanced games were a failure because the athletes were cheating or lazy or underprepared. I think they were a failure because the premise was philosophically wrong. Performance isn't a single variable you can just turn up. The human body is an integrated system. The nervous system, hormonal system, mechanical system, proprioceptive system, and all those systems have to evolve together. When you try to shortcut one part of the system, you don't just accelerate progress, you break the integration. The athletes who won that day didn't win because they were lucky or because the enhanced athletes underperformed. They won because their systems were coherent. Everything was talking in the same language, muscles, tendons, nerves, timing, all calibrated to each other over years. That's what real performance is. Not the loudest output from any one system, the cleanest signal from all of them together, and from a longevity standpoint, which is genuinely what we care about at Vital Insights, the data from Las Vegas is actually quite useful. It's a real-world stress test of the enhancement thesis, and the enhancement thesis lost. Consistent mechanical loading, precision nutrition, sleep architecture that supports natural hormonal rhythm. These aren't slow paths to performance. They are the only paths to performance that actually hold up. Artificial peaks are fragile. I'd genuinely love to know where you stand on this. The enhanced games raise a real question, not just about sports, but how far you'd go to optimize yourself. If there were no rules, no career consequences, no social judgment, and you could legally take something that would make you meaningfully better at what you do, would you do it? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to read them. See you in the next one.